Hi everyone. So we last left off where we had taken our JavaScript, we'd actually moved our JavaScript into an external file. And we were starting to play around with the visual elements on our web page. And those visual elements were these divs that we created, and we added some style properties to help give them shape and size and color and things like that. And one of the things that we mentioned is, very often we have this case where we want multiple things to look the same or basically the same, mostly the same. And that it's going to be very tedious if we ever change our mind during if we ever change our minds during the course of our design work, or say our website goes through a redesign, anything like that. If we have to make any kind of changes, it would be very, very tedious to have to do this in multiple places. And so style sheets were created. Style sheets were created so that what you could say is, hey, look, I have I'm going to have a whole bunch of elements that are going to have exactly the same style attributes, or mostly the same style attributes. And so what I'd like to do is have a way to kind of group all those style attributes together and just say, look, everything that's in that I've put in this bucket, I want you to apply to each of these divs. So what does that look like in practice? Well, it's going to look very similar. It's going to look very similar to some of the work we've been doing in JavaScript, or at least conceptually it is. So the first thing that we're going to do is we need to tell the HTML page. We're going to start out by writing our style sheet directly into our HTML, and we're going to move it out pretty quickly, but it's just to show you guys that there's a parallel here, right? So I can put this style element at the top of my web page, and what we have already is we're going to start already with a syntax. So the way that we say, if we were in JavaScript, right, and we want to say, hey, we want to make a new variable. Gosh, I don't even have any variables in here. Let's look back at our candy sorter, right? So remember we talked about how var was the way of telling the computer, hey, listen, I want you to kind of set a box aside and give it the label candy list, and then this is the stuff that's going to go in this label. The parallel in style sheets is maybe a little counterintuitive, but instead of saying var, we just put a dot. Okay, so a dot is going to be to say, hey, I want you to make a new, and we call them classes. I want you to make a new class called, I'm going to give it a name, box style, right? So just like a variable, I can give it any name I want, right? Obviously, I don't want to give it the same name as another style, otherwise it'll overwrite it. And then I give it, I make it actually, it's an object, right? And again, we're going to see how this sort of object idea is repeated over and over again. So what I've said is create a new class, right? That's what, create a new sort of place in memory, call it box style, okay? And remember, I'm in style tags, not in script tags. That's why it looks a little bit different. And now I'm going to start telling it, here are the things that I want you to do. So I want it to say, I want the width, for example, to be, I'm actually going to switch this to 400 pixels and make the height 300 pixels. Right? So we have a similar syntax, not exactly the same, right? But we have a similar syntax to what we see in our JavaScript objects, right? Which is we have these curly braces, we have a name, right? That's the name of the property that comes from the CSS, or cascading style sheet specification. And we see that Aptana has a lot of that built in for us. You guys will be looking at some links that also kind of describe some of the many, many properties that are available. And then we have whatever the value is. Now you notice that I need to put in pixels here. I need to specify dimensions. And that's because there are some cases where I could, for example, actually make this a percentage, right? So we have multiple ways that we can specify size and different types of sizes in our CSS. So we always have to make sure that we say which unit we expect it to use. In this case, we're going to say pixels. So just going off of what I did down here, I'm going to say background color, right, is going to be gray. Actually, maybe I'll make that a little darker. Right? There's always 6 elements in a hexadecimal number. And I'm going to make my text color. I'm going to go with black now since I've got dark gray text. I want to be able to see it, right? And so what's happened here? I've defined a style. Now the question is, now that I've designed this lovely style, how am I going to get it onto my divs? And the way that I do that is by specifying a class. So what this lets me do, and I just want to sort of illustrate this really quickly one more time. So let's say that in one case I decided, I had made a change. I had gone from red text to gray text, but gosh, you know, I missed one when I was making that change. And so if I see what happens when I miss one, sorry, just uploading here, right? Well, if I miss one, I see that I start to have an inconsistency in my styling, which is not going to make me happy, right? I want these boxes to look uniform at the moment. So again, controlling this with a style, with a class, with a CSS class, is going to take that away from me, is going to take that problem away. And why do we call it a class? Well, because rather than saying style, right, we can sort of get rid of this entirely. And we're going to say class equals, okay? And in between those quotation marks, we're going to give it the name box style, okay? And so basically what this does is it says, okay, if I have a class box style, then I want you to apply these things, then I want you to apply these sort of layout elements to it, these style descriptors. So again, only applied it to the top one here. Let's see what happens. And upload, yep. Okay, and Chrome, right? Now we can see we've changed one of them. Great. I'm going to change the other one here. Right, and it's confused. Now you notice, right, how box style turned green, right? So again, this is where the typography in our editor is sort of helping us out here. So I'm changing this to class. Okay, class box style. Do another upload. Right, and now hopefully they should, whoops, wrong way. It's the HTML page. Okay, and ta-da, they look the same. And if I wanted to change something about either of them, let's say I wanted to change the background color to red, right? Then any change that I make in that style will automatically apply to all of them, which is an extremely valuable thing, right? Boom. So everything that I want to look the same, I just apply the same class to it and it will look the same. Now, as we mentioned, you know, we want to sort of stay away from grouping all this stuff together in the same place because, you know, what if I make a mistake in my style sheet, then I end up breaking my whole page, right? I kind of want to be able to do this. Also, to be perfectly frank, there are some people who are just experts with CSS, and you may want to give them control over some of the styling of your interactive at some point, maybe if you trust them. And so you might want to just say, hey, you can go ahead and edit the CSS style sheet, that's fine. I'm going to keep working on the JavaScript, right? Or I'm going to edit the CSS and somebody else can be working on the JSON file, right? So it lets you kind of break these tasks up and have it be more of a team effort, which is always really valuable in these things. So right away, I'm going to actually just go ahead here and say File, and I'm going to go New from Template, and what do you know? We've got CSS template up here. And the CSS template has a default body tag in there. We're actually going to delete that, so you could just use the empty one. And very similar to what we did with our JavaScript, right, we're just going to copy this bit out and paste it right in here. Again, I'm going to sort of mess around with the placement because I care about that. And we'll see that just the same way we were able to extract our JavaScript and then include it via a link, essentially, right? Use a sort of inclusion tag. So again, asking me where I want to save it. I'm going to choose my project, give it a name. I'm going to say, I don't know, first styles. .css, again, extension, always very important, tells the computer what to do with it, right? So I can save that. And now up here, what I'm going to say, now this is interesting because the tag that we use to include a style sheet is actually different than the tag that we use to specify it if we're in the HTML. So we're actually going to say link, I always forget this, link rel equals style sheet, okay? This is, I don't know why this tag is set up this way, and as I said, I pretty much always forget what the format is. I think I'm doing okay here. And then I'm going to say href equals. Now, this sort of comes from the way that tags were, anchor tags were first done, you know, links were first done. So you can sort of just you know, take this with a bit of faith and a grain of salt here. But I'm going to include that first styles.css. I'm going to delete that style tag that I just wrote. And again, we're just going to make sure that, now obviously I have to upload my CSS sheet, and I'm going to upload my new HTML. And if everything worked as planned, right, I can see my first styles is uploaded here, then the page should look exactly the same, right? In other words, nothing should have changed. And if we're not sure if, you know, if for some reason we're not sure if maybe it didn't upload correctly, oh, that's a problem. So what did I do there? Must have made a mistake. Let's take a look here. Well, it's not going to be in the console. Console is fine. And look at the elements. Got, there we go. I see I have a misspelling in my rel tag. This one is always difficult for me. So there we go. So I know, how do I know that it wasn't working? Of course, because my styles didn't show up, right? I was expecting red boxes and gray text. So I've now fixed that link. Let's see if this does the trick. Right? But we can see how what's great about this is that I know where the problem is, right? I know the problem isn't in my JavaScript because, you know, basically the page loads and all the JavaScript still executes, but it doesn't look the way that I expect it to. So again, this is part of the reason why we start pulling these things apart into multiple files. So I've uploaded again now, fingers crossed. No, still having problems. So I think what we're seeing now actually is unfortunately a case of caching. So we talked about how caching can be advantageous to us. Unfortunately, it can also do this, which is that even when I've made changes to something, right? Oh no, I just didn't upload, sorry, I didn't upload the right file. You guys are probably sitting there being like, she doesn't even realize that she didn't upload the right file. Right? We make up stories. There we go. All right, much, much better. Now, one little thing that I want to just point out and kind of touch on before we move on to the next thing, which is going to actually be starting to work our CSS and HTML and all that good stuff together, and with our JavaScript and our data, is that, you know, you can see by default here what I'm actually getting is a stacking effect, right? I'm getting things sort of stacking up down the page. And that again has to do with what our browser defaults are, right? So anybody who builds a web browser, whether it's Google or Mozilla or, you know, Apple or whoever, they essentially bake certain assumptions in, and they basically say, look, if you don't tell me anything, these are the defaults that I'm going to use. So we see that because we see a blank white background. So it says, hey, if you don't tell me what background color to make this, I'm going to make it white. If you don't tell me what color to make the text, I'm going to make it black, etc., etc. So what we're encountering with the placement of our divs here is actually another set of assumptions. And that assumption in most cases is going to be, hey, if you don't tell me otherwise, then I'm going to assume that you want everything that you pass me, everything that you put on the page to kind of sort of block off the entire width of the page. And so in order to get around this, or rather to instruct it differently, there are three sort of parts of any CSS class that we are virtually always going to use anytime we want to sort of display a series of objects and have them respond elegantly to the shape of our page. And that's going to be these three. It's going to be position, relative, display, inline, float, left. So what does this mean? Position, relative. Well, what it's saying is, I want you to just put me as close to the thing that came before as possible, but not overlap. This is opposed to absolute, where I say the exact pixel position that I want something to be displayed at. Display inline, right? Some of the other options here are like block. So what we're actually seeing by default here is the result, I believe, of a block display. So it's saying, you know, take up this whole width, right? Don't let anything else kind of come on to, you know, be shown on my row. And float left is going to be say, well, look, you know, the same way we see with text, right? Text justifies left. Float is going to decide where things justify to. So we're going to make these changes now. The only thing we have to upload now is our CSS file, right? Because that's the only thing that's changed, is how we're describing the styles on this. And so we can see with a quick reload how this affects it. Now here's the thing that's kind of neat. We've touched on this idea of responsive design. Boom, right? Already, no effort, we're starting to see a little bit of this sort of responsive idea. So in the next step, we're going to hook this together with our JavaScript and get you guys going on kind of displaying some data on your web page.